Well, continue to watch the side, but first I want to say thank you and welcome to Karen Wills, um, Executive Director of Moose Jaw, the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance, and helping guide our UU presence here across Minnesota, connecting folks to action and political involvement, and bringing UU values of justice to the world in these precarious and tender days. And so thank you for your work and thank you for joining us. And good to see all you First UU folks. So as we begin, I invite you just to take a breath, take an easy breath. Think about what first brought you to Unitarian Universalism, and think about the values that you've encountered within it and in partnerships beyond it, and those values that are at stake right now. And how many people are working tirelessly to bring our values of justice and equity to bear in this political season, as well as spiritual sustenance and spiritual soul balance as well in this time. So I'm going to light this chalice and share a few brief words from the good poet Annie Dillard. The chalice is lit. I'll set it to the side. This is both comforting words, or these are both comforting words and daunting words. She writes, "There is no one but us. There is no one to send. Not a clean hand or a pure heart on the face of the earth or in the earth, only us, unfit, not yet ready, having each of us chosen wrongly, made a false start, yielded to impulse and the tangled comfort of pleasure, and grown exhausted, unable to seek the thread, weak, uninvolved, but there is no one but us. There has never been." In particular, I'm feeling the words unfit and not yet ready for whatever these weeks are bringing, and mindful of how can we be ready for whatever comes, and knowing that while this election is significant in terms of what values are alive and perpetuated in the world, I'm reminded of a good teacher and colleague who always said elections, and not only presidential, but some local ones as well, the political process is harm reduction. It isn't an absolutist game where everything all of a sudden is fixed and good, or all of a sudden bad and horrible. There are good and bad things all the time, but elections matter for how much they're perpetuated, or how much is created newly or differently. So voting is harm reduction, often trying to get the most values of justice and equity we can in the world. So that's by way of introduction as we hold all that we're holding in the world right now. And I'll turn it over to Karen in gratitude for you joining us to lead us through this time. And in terms of timing, our forums technically end at 7:15. Sometimes that's a little squishy, so we'll see where we are at that time, but I'll make sure to announce when we've reached it. Karen.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so great to be back in Rochester. Was the first place that I lived when I moved to Minnesota. And I had lived in Chicago and Boston and Nevada and Boston and California, Iowa City, and in all those places since I was born. I was a member of the UU churches, either as a kindergartner or as a kindergarten teacher. We moved to Minnesota And I worked for the Mayo for 3 years, and I lived in Rochester, where I learned how and taught the very first OWL class at the Rochester congregation many years ago. And I think together perhaps with some of you who are still there. And then moved up here to Children's Hospital in Minneapolis, and became a member at First Universalist and raised my kid there. Was very involved with the religious education there for many years. And with some visioning and governance kinds of issues within that church, and just got more and more involved, you know, as time went by, with doing some advocacy work as a child psychologist, and then later on as someone who was working with campaigns, managed a couple of political campaigns back in 2018. Year that there were a number of women who joined the Minnesota House, and I was involved with some of the campaigns where women did that, which was really, really exciting. And then came on to Moose Jaw when Ashley Horan moved up to be the organizing strategy director for the entire national UUA organization. And Moose Jaw needed a new director in January. So when I first came on, Luke was still on the Moose Jaw board for a short stretch there, and then Gail, of course, is still on our board. So your congregation probably is more familiar with Moose Jaw than many, because of that deep grounding and connection that you have with kind of the national roots. And I'm probably more familiar with Rochester as a congregation than some Moose Jaw people might be, because of my background and history of having lived and been there during the time when Dillman Sorrells was the minister. So it's back a ways. Anyway, so that's just a little bit about my background. What is happening right now is that Moose Jaw is working on several fronts, and our role is not typically to be sort of a program creator and a packager of programs that we then kind of dish out, you know, or offer to congregations. That might be something we'll do at some point, but most of what we do is to look for where the energy is, either on a national level that we can bring into Minnesota, which is a lot of what we've been doing around the voting work, or on a local level that we can then pull together and amplify, so that our congregations begin to get to know one another and are not so alone, not so isolated, not always trying to reinvent the wheel. So that, for example, right now we are putting together a statewide summit on racial justice issues, not to provide additional kind of didactic training to people who've been doing that now for some years, but to be able to pull us together for some reflection and some evaluation and discernment about what has been working and what works the best, and what do we need to move towards in terms of some of the racial justice work that we're doing that is place-based, and can we actually create a rapid response team around racial justice issues that is region-wide. And I say region rather than statewide, because we recently have adopted North and South Dakota, where there are 5 UU congregations. So we now are 30 rather than 25 active UU congregations. We also are working on a project in northern Minnesota that would be wonderful to have a couple of liaisons from Rochester join as you're able. And that program is focusing on beta testing a new curriculum from the UU College of Social Justice around being good relatives with Indigenous peoples in our areas. And that Northern Minnesota coalition will be the first group to sort of study and join in that series of curricula, and then we'll be providing all of us around the area with some nature walks that will teach us about the world of nature that surrounds the Line 3 pipeline. And we will be able to virtually go along on those walks with some of the indigenous Ojibwe leaders, mostly from that part of northern Minnesota. So Moose Jaw's being very active in kind of creating and forming that coalition. The UU the Vote project is one in which we've been teaming with national UU the Vote leaders who are focusing upon key states and some of the most important states to be able to mobilize voters and move ahead and make sure that everyone who's eligible to vote is registered and ready to vote, knows how to do that, has the capacity, and also, by the way, has filled out and counted with the census. So we have been working on that now for some months. And I'm aware that in your congregation in Rochester, you have actually at least 3 people who are actively running for office. And many, many of the folks in your congregation are very actively involved in those particular races, supporting them. I know other folks in Rochester have been very involved with Faith in Minnesota, which is a partisan group that is working on progressive mobilization and activation. And that also is just a wonderful way to get involved for folks, for whom that is representing their values. The specifics of what, and I'm just sort of have an eye on the clock, but we have enough time here. Let me pause there for a second because we are a small group. Could you go around and just say your name and, a sentence or two about, what it is, either how are you yearning to get involved and to be able to make a difference, if that's something that you're still seeking, or what have you found that is something that you're already doing that is really feels like you're kind of in the game? Can I call on Trish?
Hi, yes, my name is Trish Braga, and I'm a fairly new UU and just wanted to find out more about Moose Jaw, although I did do some of the postcard writing a couple weeks ago. So I enjoyed that. I'm a postcard writer more than a phone person. So
I'm glad Anne was able to get those to you. I mean, she was just doing such a fantastic organizing job of being able to get those out in Rochester, I know. So thank you for that.
Sure.
And I'm in, there's my gallery view. So I guess I'll go ahead just for the sake of expediency. Anita, what about you?
I actually haven't been super involved this season, besides trying to stay informed and talking to people and neighbors and expressing my views.
Yes. That's what we call relational organizing. We used to call it talking to neighbors and friends, but now we have to slap labels on everything. So thank you for that relational organizing. It is the most effective way, actually, to kind of get people organized. Yeah, well, we'll come back to that. Thank you. And how about Paul?
You want to take it? We're just deciding who's going to do the talking.
I just see your name too. Sorry about that.
That's Dottie, by the way.
Hi, Dottie.
Hi.
For myself, I am always kind of keeping an eye out for what I can do to make a positive difference in the community or in general. This spring and summer, I got involved a little more being a volunteer with the local history center. Not exactly hot social work, but I'm a big believer that if you find what keeps your interest, you're on the right track. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying, talking about being a liaison with your work, maybe among the indigenous people up north. That's where my family comes from, so that sparks some interest. So before I leave it, please make sure you let us know how to follow up on that before we sign off.
Yeah, I will do that. Thanks.
Great.
And Dottie, do you want to add anything to that or not so much?
You know, we tuned in to kind of keep up with what's going on and stay more informed.
Exactly.
I haven't been terribly involved other than making sure that I send out links to go to this place and order your mail-in ballot, or, you know, to all my family members, and make sure that they, you know, but so other than friends and family, you know, mostly we're just finding out what's going on out here.
Well, and that, again, you know, relational organizing, it's really, really powerful. It is the highest likelihood that you'll actually encourage somebody to vote that might not have, or just remind them, or make sure they've got the correct information, or bust some of the disinformation that's out there all over, you know, social media, that kind of thing. So, you know, that is no small thing right there. And you know, the step past making sure that each of those folks has what they need to be registered and ready is to also kind of circle back to them and say, you know, we talked a couple of weeks ago, and I know you've probably already voted by now. You are registered, you're ready to go. Could you join me in reaching out to some of your friends, right? Would you be interested in being a poll watcher? So we'll talk about some of those other kind of opportunities that might pop up, but there may be things that our that kids, or for some of us, our grandkids might be able to do that might not even be safe. You know, for some of us folks, me and my husband are a little bit more vulnerable to COVID, being over 65. So, you know, so we'll come back to that. But who else do I see? Marge Dalen, hi. I was just asking folks to comment, and you're still muted, but if you could comment a little bit about sort of what are you yearning to be able, how are you yearning to be able to make a difference, or possibly what have you already been doing that you want to share, you know, that's been a meaningful thing for you?
Well, I'm amazed you said my last name correctly. People rarely do first, second, third, fourth, fifth time. Anyway, I turned my ballot in yesterday. Both of my sons and my granddaughter have absentee ballots. One of my sons turned his in yesterday. I have worked for Alita Borrud on her campaign, done several little projects for her. And I have worked on every campaign for Stephanie Podolsky for county commissioner since she started running to replace her husband's position on the county board. And so that's, you know, doing envelopes, doing little notes, doing postcards, that sort of thing. I don't do phone calls.
Getting them out there. Yeah, and those I don't know if you were here at the very beginning, but I you know, have that awareness. You know, as long as I'm wearing my Moose Jaw hat, I'm not allowed to like publicly cheer for any particular candidate, but I will publicly cheer for democracy and for all y'all who are supporting your Unitarian Universalist people who are running for office. I can't imagine any better way to introduce, you know, when we're talking about sort of being able to have a sense that our, you know, values of the inherent worth of other human beings, no matter what their skin color or who they love or all those things happens to be, when we talk about our sense of the interdependent web, so that, you know, no, we don't get to be better than everybody. We need to be connected to everybody. You know, those kinds of values. I can't imagine any better way to represent those than to have Unitarian Universalists in public office. How cool is that? So you're not the only ones. Fortunately, there are folks up in Duluth and over at Unity Unitarian. I mean, they're you know, we are making inroads here and there.
We have
yeah.
We have 6 people in the congregation.
6? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I
All
think
right.
it covers
You
all.
take it over in the Southland there. That's really awesome. Yeah, it's really awesome. So even though we can't officially, obviously support any particular candidate as a nonpartisan C3 organization, we are super on board with the idea of electing Unitarian Universalists. How cool is that? What about Kathy Porter? Hi.
Hi. Well, this year I just summoned up all my courage and joined Isaiah, and then I went to some trainings with Isaiah Many because it was such a new language for me. And then they, of course, switched to Faith in Minnesota, and for the first time in my life, because it's so important to me, I've done like over 170 phone calls at this point, and it's been a ride, and they're kind of switching focus right now. Maybe Gus will talk to that, but I'm going to be trained tomorrow night for how they're trying to reach and get more name recognition for the Alita in this area, and so I'm learning new things because they train you on computer programs and then how to say, I just feel I have to because I don't want to do nothing. So I was very interested in finding an avenue through the church because I think the values of the UU church reflect my values. And so when I saw the Moose Jaw, I just thought, no, I'll just maybe start getting active through that at some point. But right now I'm committed to,
yes.
Faith in Minnesota.
Well, we are partnering with Isaiah, so everything that you've learned through that commitment already, the work that you've already done, any of y'all who've done some work with Faith in Minnesota, either texting or phone banking with them, we are going to be, or actually mostly phone banking, but we will be doing on Fridays and on Sundays, we will be participating in the Isaiah, what they call Democracy Days, which are a few events that are coming up, and we'll put those out there. The Sundays are on my calendar already. I'm adding the Fridays probably tomorrow, and so those are phone banks. So Anne and Gail, can how about if we start with Anne? I was just asking people to just say a word about how have you been yearning to make a difference, or what have you already been doing, just so I know where we're starting from, and so you can share with your people.
Great. Well, yearning to do. Yes. Yearning to change the way things have been going. I guess I should start by saying that I am the Moose Jaw liaison with the church, just so everybody knows.
You are indeed.
And I don't think that's well publicized, but it is the case. And that we just finished not too long ago sending postcards to Texas. With the congregation, we sent over 600 postcards to Texas. And when this week gets a little less intense, I want to get started on the letter writing project that Moose Jaw has going, which I understand is less work than the postcard project was in terms of the individual effort on each one. And I'd like to hear more about that tonight, if possible, so people know. And beyond that, I'm not really a phone banker, but I did find, Karen, the link to the phone banking for introverts.
Yes.
Because as I understand it, introverts are supposed to make the best phone bankers.
It's so true.
Once they get over the hump of actually doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if anybody's interested, there is a video out there. It's not short, but it is a training. specifically for people who consider themselves to be introverts, but are interested in doing more than postcards and texting and writing letters and relational organizing, right? I mean, getting out to be on the phone. So that's sort of where I am right now. I want to do as much as possible before November 3rd. Oh, and I will be an election judge. So.
Yay. Wow.
And I hope, and I know there are other people in our congregation who are too.
Who are out there doing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's great to see you again. Thank you for everything you've been doing.
Good to see you
already
too.
Kind of getting those, letters disseminated. And we will come back. We'll get into some of those nitty gritty. But last but not least, I think that I can see, unless there's anybody on the phone, is Gail, the great, the amazing, the wonderful, most best board member in the universe, Gail Bishop.
Well, you're very kind, Karen. I've been on the Moose Jaw board, gosh, it must be almost a decade now. So that's been exciting, in particular exciting working with Karen, who has energy and interest and enthusiasm and has made all of these connections statewide to engage people and involve folks. So we're very fortunate to have her as a director. Most recently, my involvement has been helping the Dan Feehan campaign. And then a couple months ago, at the end of the last legislative session here, my focus there was just to get our local House representatives to co-sponsor the legislation that the Senate had passed unanimously to provide funding for day providers for folks in the disability community. Many of those are struggling, many have folded in other parts of the state. It was just to allocate money that's already there from the federal government, the Medicaid money that's just sitting there in the state coffers, that it would give a percentage of them to keep them solvent so that they don't close during this time, because we can't bring all the folks with disabilities back to work. So that took a lot of energy, but it did pass. That legislation did pass, and so felt very good about that. So that's been, I can kind of feel some relief there. And now it's just trying to get some good people elected for this next year. So.
Yeah. Oof, you've got some really, really exciting races down there. And I think being able to dive into think about who is running for office in your area and who does represent your values. So and many of you obviously already are deeply in there and are doing that in one fashion or another. So what I want to share that Moose Jaw is doing is not you should come do what we're doing and stop what you're already doing. No, keep on doing what you're already doing, and just be aware of this kind of basket of opportunities, and maybe one or two opportunities to just come together as a congregation and do a couple of things, if you have that bandwidth. And if you're running somebody's campaign, as I have done, one of the things that you should be doing is telling everyone out there that that candidate is basically your savior. That's what campaigns do, that candidate that you are for is going to fix the things, and go out there and make everything better. It's, heaven willing, they will. There's so much to make better. And at the same time, having been a campaign manager, I know that that's really not completely true. It's never as true as any campaign is going to want you to believe, right? What the campaigns can really truly do is harm reduction, as Luke started us off by saying, and creating a terrain that makes it more possible for social movements and people who are moving ahead with accountability and social justice to be able to get that work done without encountering the kinds of obstacles that we have been encountering repeatedly around many, many justice issues, both at the state level and at in some spheres and at the national level. So in some ways, actually, even as somebody who has been a very political person, I think about campaigns as an opportunity to get obstacles out of the way rather than to find a savior who will fix everything for us, right? It's get stuff out of the way so that we, the people, can move ahead and, you know, get things done, right? And so, so in the time that we have, let me talk a little bit about sort of some of the tactics and strategies that we are using locally and nationally to try to help that happen. If you have a chance, and maybe, I don't know, Luke or somebody, if somebody could put that Moose Jaw web link in the chat, it's moosejaw.org. And the two places where I am updating information on a daily basis are the tab that says UU the Vote, which is where there is, you know, sort of a lot of kind of blog lists of articles and information. There's an FAQ sheet there in North Dakota. We will be adding South Dakota, which is not there yet. And there is an event calendar. And those are the two. The rest of the website tells you a lot about Moose Jaw. It's fun to take a look at. It tells you all our people, all the stuff we're working on. But the UU the Vote list gives you literally a menu of the stuff that we are working on. And it's I think, a useful way to think about different kinds of things, some of which you're already doing, as you've just explained, and some of which might be something to consider adding. It's like, oh, I didn't know about that. Let me do that. It's only going to take me 10 minutes, right? So what you will see on that menu, and it's too much, I'm not even going to screen share it right now. I'll just send you the link and let you fool around with it yourself. But what you will see there is the appetizers are those broadcast opportunities. It's the kinds of things that we can do that simply slap our opinion up on a bumper sticker or a lawn sign, or have us, you know, standing on an overpass with a banner, being able to post information into our own Facebook page or Instagram or other social media that we might use. Sharing that information out there in a public way isn't nothing. That is worth doing, and it takes 5 minutes. You know, those are easy, simple, cheap things to do. And so one of the things that I would really love is if 100% of Unitarian Universalists across the state of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota do that, like one of those appetizers, sample something. The thing about that, though, is that the majority of the population is going to stop with the appetizers and really not move beyond that at all. And that actually speaks to people who are kind of already thinking in progressive terms. So those appetizers don't take someone who's a little bit hesitant about whether or not they want to bother voting and move them to the polls. And what we need to do is kind of get souls to the polls, and that's what UUs are doing all over the country. So, like most of you, we're moving on to the first course and the main course. The first course, which is very, very simple, quick things to do, is to simply contact any college or university that you have a connection with and make sure that you have checked in, and there's a website there on our page, with those colleges and universities to make sure that they are encouraging their students to get registered and vote, because that is a population that often doesn't. And ideally, that they are encouraging their students to ask their friends, including people who are not currently in college, to reach out. That age range between about 18 and roughly 30 still has the lowest rate of voter turnout anywhere, and we know that that is a group that tends to lean towards more progressive values when they do vote, but that also becomes disaffected, doesn't feel like their vote is making that much of a difference. sometimes feels as though there's too much compromise in politics, and that's an age at which compromise often doesn't come naturally to many people. So being able to reach out, as some of you said you've already done, to your own, sort of kids and grandkids and people in that age group is critically important. A second way that we're doing that, beyond just asking the colleges, gets us into the main courses. And the main courses have to do with 4 ways of actually reaching out to voters other than ourselves. We can start with our own acquaintances, family and friends, and call them up and reach out and do that relational organizing. And that can start with, looking at who are you connected with on Facebook. Have you checked in with each of those people recently? I have 2,500 or 25,000 actually. 2,500 Facebook friends. Most of whom I don't even know very well. About half of those are organizers, and I don't need to call them. They're doing what I'm doing. But the other half, I can, go down that list and reach out. And I'm using an app on my phone with my handy Moose Jaw little thing on my phone called Get Empower. The app is called Empower. Isaiah also is using Empower, as is Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, as is the Sierra Club. Many, many organizations like our UU organizations are downloading this app, Empower. You can load up your telephone contacts, go through and contact each of those with a text message, a phone call, or a Facebook message. Or if you're on Snapchat or WhatsApp, you can use those as well to contact folks. One sec, I gotta plug in my phone. Plug in my iPad, which is, of course, losing its battery. There we go. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Is that sound still okay? Can you still hear me all right? I have to take my buds off. Okay, thank you. So the first way that we are doing text banking and phone calls is to our own acquaintances and friends using Empower as a tool which is going to create kind of a rapid response network. So if things get a little kooky after the election, regardless who wins, we will be able to reach out to all y'all who are using Empower with some additional information and resources about what UUs across the region are doing to deal with whatever may come. So that information is not being sold. The Empower organization doesn't have it. The only people who have access to that is us Moose Jaw, which is me and Allison Wyeth. So, so we can talk some more, and I'm more than happy to coach people in that. We will have a set of instructions that are going up on our website tomorrow. We just did a training on this Tuesday night. So that is one useful tool that even, and because you're talking to people that you're already at least somewhat acquainted with, it tends to be a comfortable way to start some of these conversations. So that relational organizing, starting with who you know, reaching out, making sure they have done the census and that they are ready and registered, and will they please reach out to 3 other people? So now think about it, you're tripling the number of people that you have contacted about voting just by asking each one of them to commit to reach out to 3 more, right? And so that's a place to start. Texting or phone calling through Moose Jaw is not something that I personally am like setting up and creating, but what we have done is to partner primarily with organizations that are doing outreach to younger voters and to people who live in apartments and to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color around Minnesota and then in some other key states. And that does involve a little more tech, all right? So for the texting that we're doing, it does require having a computer. But I think what you will see is that most of the people who are doing that, are not like, 25-year-old tech gurus. Most of them are 75-year-old, somebody's grandma who gave it a try, just like you were just saying. It turns out to be less complicated than it sounds, because instead of, being like this with your thumbs, which I'm hopeless at, and worrying about your own personal phone number showing up on some stranger's thing, or worrying about you're going to get a bazillion texts in reply, it doesn't work like that. When you are texting through a text bank, what you do is you sign on to a website, and you will have a Zoom meeting going where people will teach you how to use it. And you're sending out as many as 1,000 texts in an hour, reaching 1,000 voters in 1 hour, by like tapping messages, just clicking on certain messages on your computer. They go out really, 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 really fast. Most of them, you're never going to get an answer. People are not going to reply, right? Think about if you ever get those texts on your own phone, there's precious few that you're going to answer. But you will be sharing useful voting information with a ton of people. And 1,000 per hour sounds like a lot, but think about there's like 25,000 people typically in a typical House district in Minnesota. And, so 1,000 per hour, we need lots and lots and lots of volunteers doing that. Every once in a while, someone will reply, and you'll get an answer back. It'll pop up on your computer, and it'll say, oh, could you explain to me about, where is my polling place? And you'll have a list on the computer, and you click on the one that says, where is the person's polling place? And it shoots them the answer. So you don't have to know anything. It's really kind of automatic. You can personalize it a bit. So you can say, oh, thank you so much for asking me that. Or, wow, I used to live in your town, and guess what? You can add a little personal note so they know that you're not a robot. And that can go back and forth really very quickly. I'm seeing on the clock at 7:15. So if we have another like 5 minutes, we'll try not to go too late if you guys are still with us. All right, if you have to leave, no harm, no foul. We'll try to send a follow-up email that has these details in it. Okay.
For Karen, and just one moment too. There was one person at the when we were going around checking in, Jessie, who's here, who wasn't on video at the time, but I just want to give her a chance to check in case she needs to go away before.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really need to go away. I apologize. I was still working while I was trying to do 2 things at once, so I could hear you and still work. So that's why my video was off. I guess now that you've been talking, I'm probably more in the appetizer realm right now this go around, which is really disappointing to me. I've been more active in other things, canvassing and whatnot, but this year it's been pretty hard with just some other things that I'm involved in. But I think mostly what I've been trying to do is in my employment, we're really working on race equity issues. That really does relate to voting right now, I'm finding, and trying to empower some of the people I supervise who go out and work with underprivileged, vulnerable populations in the community to get them to vote, and helping them figure out how to vote, not who they should vote for, unfortunately, but making sure that they just have access to all of that stuff. So in a roundabout way, I guess I'm doing a little bit, but not nearly what I'd like my daughter and I to be doing. So
You may be just the person that I want to talk with some more about this Racial Justice Summit meeting that we have coming up in November.
Sure.
So we'll hopefully have a chance to kind of talk some more after this election, kind of about that, or maybe a little as it gets a little closer too. That's you'll certainly be seeing more about that in the Moose Jaw news that's coming out. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. So so like I say, you have 2 ways, two methods of texting. One is right on your phone. The other does require a computer that will run Chrome or Firefox browser. It doesn't run on Safari, and it will not run on an iPad or by itself on a phone. So the text banking and the phone banking do require that you have some kind of computer. For phone banking, the system is really very similar, but what happens with that is that we pull up on the computer a website that gives you one name after another and a little script where you check off the boxes for the conversation that you're having with each of those people. And the computer links to your phone. So you're like on your phone, hopefully with earbuds, and able to kind of look at the names on the computer, check off the answers to some questions, and follow the script on the computer while you're talking to the person on the phone. And that does require a little bit more tech juggling, but but again, not a ton. The advantage of that, unlike many phone banks for local candidates, where you basically, like for city council, you're likely to simply get a spreadsheet with names on it, right? Or at best, maybe something, on your computer where you have to dial each name. The reason why these national phone banks and national text banks are using the computer to generate the names is that it calls in and connects you without you having to sit there and listen to the ringing and listen to the answering machines, most of which are going to come up as those calls get made. So the central bank deals with that. You don't get connected with someone until they've actually picked up and there's a human on the other end of the line. So it means that when you do talk to somebody, there's an actual person there, and it's a little bit less grueling than having to listen to all of that ringing and deal with all the answering machines. So, so right now, basically, texting, phoning are the primary strategies that we have left in the last 33 days to be able to reach out to people who are uncertain about whether or not they're going to vote at all, uncertain about how to vote, uncertain about how to check their registration. We're really reaching people who are that big chunk that often just doesn't vote, or because they don't know how, right? Or because they're not certain that it's going to make any difference. I'm finding that those kinds of nonpartisan calls are so different from party calls. At this point in the game, the parties are mostly going to be calling the folks that they know are highly likely to vote and who are their adherents, right? So phone banking for the party can be a lot of fun right now, because you're going to be calling people who are your like-minded folk if you've chosen your own party to phone bank with. Phone banking people who are a little bit more on the fence, those are what we call persuasion calls or information calls. But since we're not coming at them from a party stance, and since we still live in a country where like 40% of the country thinks both parties kind of stink, we need to be reaching out to those folks and saying, well, maybe both parties do stink in some ways. That's not entirely inaccurate all the time. Both parties have their flaws, as don't we all. And at the same time, we need to have a terrain with fewer obstacles. We need to think about harm reduction. We need to think about the situation that we're in right now and think about whether there's any chance that putting elected people in place will enable us to move some obstacles over so that social movement can move ahead. We know that simply electing the right people by itself doesn't do it without a strong social movement. We saw that with immigration in 2008 and 2009, for example. We've got to have both. So we need to not give up after this election, no matter what. And we need to try to keep on working on that hesitant third of possible voters to try to encourage them to get to the polls. And for me right now, I also am working very hard on several partisan campaigns for the people that I care about, but I'm also looking to make that a bit of a balanced diet. So I'm spending some time phone banking or text banking with this nonpartisan outreach to younger people, and particularly to people of color who are focused because they are being disproportionately suppressed and marginalized in their opportunities for voting. And so that's kind of the balance. Last thing, the letters to voters that Anne spoke about. The deadline for those letters to get in the mail is October 17th. So there is still time for folks who are excited about writing. If you're going camping, you can bring this with you easier than phone banks, you know. If you're sitting in your garden having coffee in the morning, you could spend 20 minutes writing letters. It typically takes about an hour for a person to send 20 letters. So it's reaching fewer people per unit time. But the impact of the letters has been documented to be very strong. So it's an effective way to reach a fewer number of people, right? And how it works is that those letters can be printed either at home or, you know, in the church office would be the quickest way to get those, or I can FedEx them to you if you need me to. And, you know, they are pre-printed letters in which you're adding just 1 or 2 sentences. And they basically, each letter goes to an individual voter. Typically, right now, we are sending letters to Georgia, Texas, or Florida. Those are the states where we have the most need. And Moose Jaw so far, between the postcards that many of you worked on and the letters that we've been doing more recently, we have sent out about 18,000, and we're shooting for about 20,000 outreach simply with those postcards and letters that we're writing. So that's kind of a lot. And we know that when those land in people's boxes, there was a study in Georgia that the people who got that letter a week or two before the election were 82% more likely to vote in the Georgia primary than folks who are similar demographics who did not get letters. And you're able to go follow up and look at, you know, who actually voted. So they are actually quite impactful, but it's a really, really tight time window now. And we're hoping that at the end, when it's too late to put things in the mail anymore, that some folks who have been writing letters will hop onto either Empower or text banking or phone banking, either with us, you know, one of the groups that we're working with, or with one of your local candidates, and just, you know, kind of make that final push. You know, one last thing for those of you who just are really looking for a very, you know, some non-intrusive kind of thing to do. This is kind of fun. My campaigns, we created a program called Lightbringers. At the end of the campaign, people often are going after work and dropping off literature like the week and 2 before the election. And if you're working for a candidate, one of the things that you can do is get some of those good lanterns at, you know, like Menards or someplace, and be a light bringer. Walk along with your flashlight, you know, as it gets dark now, coming towards the end of the day. And if you're dropping flyers, be a light bringer walking around that neighborhood with those lanterns. It is incredibly empowering to the people on the campaign. You know, if there's like, my light bringers often were older people who would walk along the block, and then the younger people would run back and forth to the doors, dropping off the flyers. So if you have candidates who are doing that, that's another way to make a difference. I firmly believe that everybody can do something, and everybody, I want 100% of Unitarian Universalists being able to say, this is what I did. This is what I tried. So that's a lot to absorb, like all at once. All this stuff is on the website. If you have questions about stuff, I will be sending a follow-up email specifically about the texting and with the materials that you need. If you're able to kind of print some of those letters locally, that would be helpful at this point. So yeah, do we have a couple minutes? If there are the questions, thoughts that you all have, how's some of this landing?
Well, I would like to do letters on the times. I feel way more comfortable doing letters than I would doing these phone calls, but I'll keep that too. But I don't have a printer. So where would I come to get them? Because I'll take a stack, and I think I have people then in the neighborhood even who would be willing to write them. So where would I get some?
Anne or Luke, if I send you a PDF or send you the instructions for how to make one, do either of you have access to a printer where that's possible?
I do.
Yeah.
Definitely. I have a laser printer at home
So Anne's got one at home, and we can
that I can
certainly
easily
print
print letters
things
off.
at the church too. Yep.
Right.
So if you send it our
Yeah.
way, Karen, we can take it from there. Absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's very easy for me to generate them at this point, but in order to get them to you in time, I would have to FedEx it, and that's getting a little spendy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Just send them.
Sweet.
Just
All
send
right,
a
we'll do
PDF.
that. We'll do
And
that.
then if you can just let me know, I'll just come to the church and get them.
That's great. Yep.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So do we
Yeah.
supply the envelopes and the stamps, or do we just get the letter and then write stuff and then stick them in envelopes and mail them?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
that is certainly the easiest way. They fit, it's an 8.5 and 11 piece of paper, and it just goes into a regular business envelope.
Okay.
It typically takes about an hour to an hour and a half, usually about 1 hour, to write 20 letters is kind of the average. So I don't know, if I send y'all, a set of 100, do you think you can farm those out?
Easily.
Okay.
I think easily we can get out that many, maybe more. But let's start with 100.
Yeah.
And we'll see how many people are willing to do, because I have at least 5 other people who are willing to do letters also.
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. A question for Luke.
Yeah.
Can we get envelopes and stamps paid for by the church?
Yeah, I think so. I
Can we
know
do
for
that?
sure envelopes, we've got a bunch here that, and we can get stamps as well. We can find some place where that money can come from your generous pledges.
You know,
Yeah.
Awesome.
there used to
it's
be
$55 for a roll of 100 stamps.
There used to be boxes, and I don't of envelopes. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got some in the office.
There used to be sign printed on them. I don't know where they are. If they're still somewhere in the church, they're very eye-catching, and they're more likely to be opened, I suspect, if people get them.
Right. Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, we could cover that.
Do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing I've discovered is that Costco, if anybody has a Costco membership, Costco has this marvelous office supply department, and you can get 500 envelopes for $11. So that, it's, so I've been purchasing all of our envelopes so far from the ones that I sent you before, came from Costco. That's a great place. And of course, stamps are standard. You get a roll of stamps, and it's $55 for 100 stamps. So Moose Jaw has spent, I think the grand total is something like $6,300 on postage in the course of all of this. But we had a grant for about $5,000 from the UUA to do that, and then we were able to raise about another $1,200 or so. So basically, Moose Jaw is breaking even on postage. So yeah, it's been good. I mean, I think people are so excited about the opportunity to do that and do that outreach, because we read the news every day about what they're doing in terms of, just egregious voter suppression. So it has felt really good to be doing some of that outreach into states that are facing that, as well as working for our candidates locally here in Minnesota, where we also face somewhat lesser versions of that. So,
and if anybody's feeling generous about helping Moose Jaw so that we can fulfill some of these things, as a board member, I encourage you, any kind of donation is welcome. So that would be helpful, because it enables us to fulfill the things that we're doing. There's a lot of things that we're undertaking are out of our own budgets at Moose Jaw. So we survive on the generosity of Unitarian Universalists. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind too.
We do. Our mission is to do the stuff that you long to do and just don't have time for. That's what we're here for. So, if that is something that means something to you, we are eternally grateful for the support that you have to let us kind of do this work. I've been longing to kind of do this work as my job for pretty much my whole life. So it's really exciting to be in a space to be able to do that. But y'all are being also very generous.
Can I
with
ask
your
a question?
time. Any other? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question, and that is, I recently found out that this is what the first presidential election in which there's no consent decree. So,
yep.
It's effectively, and not to be partisan, but the problem was with Republicans before, it still is. Republicans showing up outside the balloting places, the voting polls, to basically intimidate voters and keep them from voting. I'm wondering if we've talked anything about that, about having people outside of nonpartisan people, UUs outside of balloting places where we can encourage people to vote, where we can be welcoming. I mean, that's all I'm thinking, is just being welcoming and happy and glad you're here and please come forward and vote. Someplace to effectively mentally overpower the potential disruptor presence.
Yep.
And I realize that isn't necessarily a safe thing to do, but I'm just wondering if we've thought about it.
Well, one of them, so glad you asked, because one of the things that's on the dessert list, the dessert menu of our menu, are those opportunities to be, to either to serve as an election judge, as you're doing, and there are still some parts of the state. I put a link on my website to some areas of the state where they are still looking for election judges. And some of those are the smaller towns and county areas right around in CD1. So that may be worth it. That still is worth considering, that it's getting late, and you may see that the deadline for applying to be an election judge is actually passed. I would say go ahead and put your name in for the county anyway, because they may be looking for extra people. So that's for one. For two, the political parties are very actively recruiting and training people right now to be poll challengers. And those are, the law is that you can have one person from each major party present actually inside the polling places for each precinct. And their job is to simply keep an eye out for shenanigans and report it on a hotline if anything untoward is occurring, in which case there are lawyers from the National Lawyers Guild, there are election overseers from the Secretary of State's office, and worst case scenario, there are the police who will be keeping an eye out for like really illegal, inappropriate behavior around the polls. And then less formally, the National Lawyers Guild also is training people to serve as poll watchers. And that's a thing where if you really want to stay away from the COVID, you stay in your car at least 100 yards away from the door of the polling place. And again, you're just sitting there in your car, taking a shift, sort of just keeping an eye on things. Both parties in Minnesota, both of the major parties in Minnesota, are very actively recruiting and training people to do that work. We just don't know how necessary that's going to be. There is a fair bit of hype around it. Some of that may be a tad overblown. At the same time, if you've seen some headlines from the Virginia election recently, you have seen people in camos, open carrying, standing like in front of the polls, with conveying the impression that they are there to intimidate and discourage voting from people who are not white males in camo carrying long guns. So this is not insane. It has been happening, and it could very well happen in Minnesota as well. So people really are kind of keeping an eye out. Not that you're going to get in the way of the guy in camo with the gun, but that you will be calling the Lawyers Guild, calling the voter hotline to report that there appear to be intimidation tactics at the polls. And then there are people whose job it is to intervene and ask those gentlemen to move along. So, yeah.
Well,
It's
thank
going to be an
you.
interesting year.
Oh,
Well, thank you all so much. I know we ran like way late, but I really, really appreciate
okay.
your patience.
Thank you, Karen, for your time. And I invite you just to take just one more little small breath of getting ready for this. And one final closing word from Wayne Arneson, a leader in our tradition, who says, "Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone." So thank you for not being alone. Thanks for being together. And thanks, Karen, for all your work. Be well. And if there are any questions following this, let me know. And we'll get you connected with Karen and Moose Jaw and the work that we all have to do.